Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. This conversation today represents our progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business-owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship of the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to the advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful for Jay and his foundation. Last month, we featured Professor Bernie Jaworski about his book, Creating the Organization of the Future. And before we begin, I wanted to mention two other exciting initiatives that we have going on here at the Drucker School. Bear with me while I share my screen here. The first is our Generational Wealth Masterclass content. This is a collaboration with Jay Hughes. There's 25 different sessions. If you are interested in being involved or getting on the wait list for that as it comes out soon, please do send me an email. We also offer our certificate in advising family enterprises. I know that we have a number of advisors on the call with us today. If you're interested in having your organization host a certificate program, again, please do reach out. There's a number of wonderful institutions that have taken advantage of this in 2023, and we are excited for what's happening in 2024. Just a preview of next month. Next month, I'll be hosting Rob Lochnower from Banyan, and we're going to talk about his book, The Family Business Handbook from the Harvard Business Review. And now we will get to the star of our show. Today's guest on Authors at Drucker is Peter Vogel. Peter is the professor of family business and entrepreneurship at IMD Business School in Switzerland. So Peter's joining me at the end of his day while we're at the beginning of ours here in the United States. Thank you, Peter. He's an expert in family enterprises and leads IMD's work in this field as the director of the IMD Global Family Business Center and Debiopharm Chair of Family Philanthropy. Peter's the author of the Family Philanthropy Navigator, and today we'll focus on his newly released book, Family Office Navigator. Peter, thank you so much for joining us on Authors at Drucker.
Thank you, Dave, for having me.
So, Peter, I wanted to just get a little bit of your background. You weren't always working with family businesses and family offices and family philanthropy. Can you tell us about just how you arrived in this field? I'm curious.
I think it sums up in the word serendipity. I think different dots connected. First of all, hello, everybody. Great to meet you, at least virtually. And thanks so much for joining. My background is actually more in the engineering space, and I've been more of an entrepreneur in that sense, but always had a foot in the door in academia, focusing a lot on entrepreneurship. And I've always had different touch points with the world of family business, family enterprises, on a personal side. At some point, those worlds started to collide when I started working with some families on next-gen entrepreneurship initiatives. A lot of next-gens want to get into the world of entrepreneurship. So I started working with some next-gens, and I started working with families on building startup ecosystems inside their families. And then from there, you go to succession. From there, you go to governance. From there, you go to building enterprises and all of that. And the rest is history in some way. And now since 6 years at IMD, also associate partner at the Cambridge Family Enterprise Group out of Massachusetts. And pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So today we're going to talk all about family office. This is a term that is thrown around quite loosely these days and is in vogue. Can you give us a quick history of the family office concept and maybe how it's evolved to where we are today?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's quite interesting when you think about the term family office, because again, it's en vogue right now. And over the last 10, 20 years, we've seen it pop up everywhere. And I think, especially if you look at Asia and some other places, it has become very, very mainstream. And, many families are highly confused about kind of what is it really, what is it not? Do we have one? Do we don't have one, right? It's a little bit confusing. And in some form or shape, our work is about helping families navigate that space and to gain a better understanding of it. Now, one can argue that, of course, we talk about family offices and we all, if I ask all of you, what is a family office? We all have something in mind. Some would say it's a physical office for the family. Some would say it's a wealth management organization managing liquid or illiquid or other forms of assets. Some would say, well, it's the office that helps families organize their family life and their family meetings. And for some, they would say it's something completely different, just getting organized and helping organize their complexities that they have in the family structures, etc. And probably the answer is all of it is right in some form or shape. And, I think in the most abstracted sense, if we take a more broad view, then it is an investment office. If we allow ourselves to think more broadly beyond the pure financial assets, then we can say the family office has been around for forever in some form or shape, even going back to the Roman ages. And then the trust systems emerged, which in an abstracted way back then in the Crusaders' time have been also essentially doing part of that job. And then, of course, then in the time of the Rockefellers and House of Morgan, that's when we would see the first family offices emerge that probably we would think of as a family office today. And the reason why we also said now is a good time to rethink this is because we believe we are in what we call the fourth wave of family offices, where we see a lot of modernization of family offices. We see a lot of buzz in the space. We see a lot of players popping up, more and more families interested in this. There are a lot of emerging trends and the nature of a family office is transforming. And I think it's a super exciting time, but it's also a time where families need tools to empower them to navigate that space, to not be alone in this, to understand, I have a liquidity event. What do I do? Where do I go? Who do I speak to? And it's a highly complicated space, but an exciting one where, again, you don't need to have everything in-house. There are modern ways of organizing a family office, whatever that might be, thinking of it more than a service portfolio rather than a physical office or an entity in the legal sense, thinking of it more as an aggregation, a cluster of services that helps a family get jobs done. Essentially, that's where we see a bit the evolution and where we see this great excitement over the last couple of years, where I think we are in a sort of disruptive moment in time in the family office space.
So, Peter, in your book, you talk about the family enterprise ecosystem. So I loved kind of the visual of that. Do you want to talk about, why that concept kind of as an analogy works so well with family office?
Look, I think we think about family enterprise ecosystems in a holistic, integrative way, in the sense that a family enterprise ecosystem is dynamic, it's evolving, it's a living, breathing organism, which is composed of the family, of course, but it's also composed of the entities, of the activities, of the companies, the investments, the philanthropic activities, the assets, the real estate. So it's an aggregation of things that make up this living and breathing organism, like a biological ecosystem, which is why we use the metaphor of coral reefs, as a matter of fact. And we say that there is what we call total family wealth within that ecosystem, which needs to be nurtured and protected and groomed, which includes human capital, social capital, of course, financial capital, but also reputational capital, intellectual capital, spiritual capital. So the ecosystem is a very rich organism in the literal sense of an organism that needs to be protected and groomed and nurtured in whatever form or shape you want this ecosystem to evolve. And we use that metaphor very consciously in the book, because we tell families you have to think about your ecosystem and what it looks like today, what you want it to look like in the future. And then where do you have complexities in that ecosystem? Are you a very large globally scattered family with scattered assets? Or are you a very nuclear family located in one location with a business and some liquidity, right? Obviously, the job to be done by a family office will look very different in both cases.
Yeah.
So we say there is an ecosystem, and the job of a family office is to help a family manage and nurture and protect that ecosystem and help the family evolve that ecosystem into whatever they want it to evolve, really. That's the idea of the metaphor and the story, and where the family office is a portfolio of services at the service of the family and at the service of the ecosystem.
No, it's an analogy that works really well for me. I mean, you think about some of the changes that happen in a family, whether it's a liquidity event, and you may have a family that was functioning very well with an operating company, that now they have a liquidity event and their interactions with each other are different. Their levels of trust around what they're investing in and how they're approaching that liquidity, it can very much upset an ecosystem. And I'm curious about editing an ecosystem or modifying it because of these different events or just the changes in the family. What have you seen there? Because I find that is one of the toughest parts in managing it as an ecosystem, or thinking of it in that way.
Well, look, I mean, I think, as you say, ecosystems change and form and shape, and they constantly evolve. And I think that is one of the beauties of it. And if we allow ourselves as families, or if you work with families, either in your own family or if you work with families, to allow them to think in a more abstracted sense, to say, maybe you have an operating company, that's good. Maybe you want to diversify for diversification reasons to de-risk. Maybe you had a liquidity event and you need to think about other avenues. Maybe you sold your family business altogether and you're just trying to find a new identity, a new home, a new purpose as a family. And so I think this evolutionary nature of the ecosystem is really what we want to get to. And it's the evolutionary nature of a family office, because the family office is not a thing that is set in stone the way you imagine it at some point, or the founder of the family office imagines it. It constantly needs to be redesigned, like any venture, as a matter of fact. And you need to recontract at the time of generational transitions, or maybe you have an operating business and you have some liquidity, and then you set up a family office on the side, or however you decide to do it from a governance point of view. But then, 10 years later, maybe you buy up other companies, or you sell your legacy company, and you're in this identity redefinition moment, and you need to think about who are we, who do we want to be. And so I think this evolutionary aspect of the ecosystem is hugely important. And it's an invitation that every now and then you do, a strategy session essentially, but also a reflection session where you just say, where are we? Who are we? What does it look like? Are we comfortable with it? Where do we need to redesign things? Right.
Yeah. And I think that takes us to kind of your 4 organizing questions, which are very simplistic, but powerful. And so maybe we can just step through those. I'll read them, and then we can talk about them. One is just, who are we as a family? Seems like a very simple question, not a simple question. The second is, what do we own? That might be the easiest of the 4 questions. What do we own? The third is, how are we organized? And then 4 is, what is our role in society and our impact on the environment? I guess when you think about that first question, who are we as a family? Like when you've asked that question, when you've asked a family to just define who are we as a family, what does that typically look like? What does that sound like? What kind of answers do you get?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? I mean, the reason why we map it out that way is because it links to this total wealth concept, total family wealth concept, because we can say, well, who are we as a family? Again, are we a family of 5 all living in the same city? Or are we a family of 500 living over 5 continents, maybe not even speaking the same language anymore because we're in the 7th generation and we just happen to end up in different places, but we happen to still have some bloodline relation and we're born into this, And So I think the definition, again, why we're mapping out these 4 clusters is to say, well, you need to map out your ecosystem across a set of questions. We have a questionnaire that we developed around that. And then to understand, where do you have complexities? Where do you have challenges? What are the jobs to be done by a service entity like a family office? And then from there to mirror the services, right? So again, for example, let's say in the who are we as a family, you come to the conclusion, we're a very geographically and emotionally close family. It's a small family in one location. Then probably the job to be done by the family office is not really help organize family gatherings, right? But if you're a family of 500 and you co-own an operating company, but you're scattered across the globe and you need occasionally to have ownership meetings and family meetings and gatherings and assemblies, then probably a job to be done by the family office is organize those meetings, help with the next gen education, help managing the family intranet, help managing the family newsletters, help managing family governance, help all of those things. So the who are we as a family is literally mapping out, where do we have complexities on the family side? What do we own? Again, I mean, I think in some way it's quite an obvious question. In some way, you map out the various types of assets that you have and in what form and shape they are set up and structured, and you map out your portfolio of assets and how liquid, illiquid, and how flexible your capital is. And then what are the jobs to be done of the family office to help you get organized on the function? How do we function? That's the governance side. How integrated or not do we want the family office to be with the wider ecosystem? Some families choose to very consciously have it very separate from the operating business. Some integrated, some actually emerge out of an operating business as an embedded family office. Some label their holding company as a family office, right? So again, it's this myriad of different interpretations of what it is, and then our role in society and vis-a-vis the environment. I mean, that is obviously, it links to philanthropy, impact investing, helping the reputational capital of the family also in terms of storytelling. Who are we as a family? What do we want to do? What is our role in society? How do we want to be perceived? And the family office can play a critical role in the storytelling side, but also in organizing and aligning CSR activities in the business, investment activities, whether it's impact investing, et cetera, right? And the philanthropic side, and say, well, what does good look like for us as a family? And what is the footprint in a more abstracted sense that we want to have on this planet, right?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of families basically choosing each other. And one of the things that we've learned is it's important for individuals to have a path out in order for them to choose to stay in. As you think about some of the organizing principles of these family offices, what are some great reasons for them to come together in a family office structure? And maybe share with us, maybe even more importantly, why should a family not be in a family office together? Are there, I mean, just because they're popular and they're in vogue, I feel like sometimes families get into a family office situation where they really don't need to be. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think there are two questions in this question. One is, why should we or should we not be organized in a family office or have a family office? But then the second one is the together question, because I see these as two separate questions. Okay. One is, should we, in the first place, think about a family office or not? Whatever that means. And the other one is, if we agree we should we do this together or separately? And there are reasons for and against all of that, obviously. Now, the first question of, do we need a family office or not? Again, it comes down to the question of what are the jobs to be done. Now, if you identify that there are numerous complexities that you need to manage, and I mean, the most obvious one is, we're a family, we had a liquidity event, we have assets, we need them to be managed in some form or shape. We need to have some infrastructure around that to manage the different banking relationships and products and the companies we're investing in. Sure, that's probably a pretty solid reason to say we need some sort of family office services. I'm not saying this is a reason to set up a single family office or think single family office, because I think we're also trying to pull the people away from the concept of you need to have everything in-house. We're trying to, along those four pillars of who we are, what we own, how we function, our role in society, we're trying to tell them what is the job to be done, what are the services that you need, which ones are strategic for you, for your ecosystem, and what you want to achieve as a family, the kind of bigger aspirational purpose. And then if you have strategic services, those are the ones you need to have it in-house. Yeah. The core services, and there probably you need to have help in-house because you have it under control. But other things, in the kind of family office as a service type of logic, if we say the Uberization of family offices, what are the things we can rent? What services can we rent and we can be much more effective from a cost point of view, and actually access to better quality software solutions and services. Right. So I think the question of should we do it or not is an important one. It goes back to this assessment of what does our ecosystem look like and where do we have complexities, and are there jobs to be done where we can be better off by getting organized. Now, the second one is, should we do this together or not? This is an interesting one where, again, different families have different philosophies. There are some obvious reasons to do things together, which is, economies of scale, questions, etc., where you just say, hey, it just makes a lot of sense, but there are also reasons. Then it's a question of how you set it up, right? I mean, is it a all-in question and we have investment governance and your assets are there and they're managed on your behalf and you don't have a say over it, or you're part of the investment committee, but essentially we invest all collectively. That's one way. But the other way is to what we call single multifamily offices, where we look at different parts of larger family systems as individual clients of maybe the same family office. So it functions like a multifamily office, but for one closed bloodline related family, where again, we can have some shared services, which might make a lot of sense. We can negotiate terms with banks in a centralized way, which makes a lot of sense for everybody. We do that as a service level to the family. But then on the investment side, maybe you have a different risk profile than I have, right? Maybe you have expertise in real estate and some interest in it. Maybe I say I'm more in the startup space. Does it mean I have to now invest in real estate alongside you? Well, sure. From a diversification point of view, that's probably a good idea, right? So, but maybe you don't go along with my risk profile and say, let's go into SPACs, let's go into cryptocurrencies with 50% of our assets. And so this togetherness is a challenge, and it goes back then to governance. How do we manage this togetherness so that especially those that are maybe not at the forefront of leading the family office initiatives in the larger families, you oftentimes have the 1, 2, 3 individuals in the family that would march ahead on behalf of the family. And how do you make sure that the others are taken along in the journey and have a say, right? Yeah. So I think there are a lot of nuanced questions in there, but I agree there is a mega hype around it, and many families would look at a family office as an end goal, that they say this is almost the ultimate goal. You have a family business and then you have a family office. That's the next stage of evolution, where we try to change the narrative and say, a family office is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. It's a means to an end. If you have complexities in your ecosystem, the biological ecosystem, and there are jobs to be done where we can be better, more effective, more organized. You don't all have to have the banking relationships. You don't all have to work with the lawyers and your tax advisors. We can do this and help you centrally. Well, that's a compelling reason, right?
Yeah. This question of in-house versus outsource is a really interesting one. As you think about single family offices, the question in my mind is, no matter how large that entity is or the assets there, can you attract the talent that can just pay attention to your family is a huge question in my mind, especially as you look at kind of the, this new role that seems to be popping up of the chief learning officer. Do you have any opinions on that? I mean, it feels like there'll probably be a lot more maybe fractional chief learning officers than there will be one person dedicated to one single family office that would take on that role of that learning officer role. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the point of having things in-house or not, I mean, I think it's again a question of if you are a family of 1,500 family members, and I mean there are obviously families of that size and quantity and complexity where I know a European family, they have more than 2,000 family members that are served by one single family office. They have hundreds of people in that family office team, and they have a dedicated team on talent development, family talent development, and they have clustered it by age group, the young kids, the teenagers, I'm going to university, I'm graduating from university into the first job, I'm thinking about getting on this track or that track. They have dedicated teams for each one of these career phases. Now, there you can say, yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? Because in every of these clusters, you have a critical mass to justify full-time staff or part-time staff. But if you're a family of 5 and you're thinking about 9 next gens, are you really building up a dedicated team in-house for that? Then the question is more, in those smaller family structures, what is the role of the CEO of the family office? Or, we're like in a startup, really. I mean, if you're a founder of a venture, you're kind of a jack of all trades, right? You have to wear multiple hats. You're a salesperson, you're a techie, you're business development, you're the CFO, you're the legal expert. You have to be a little bit of everything. In some way, again, you can deal with it in various ways. It boils down to the cost sensitivity of the family. If you're willing to invest and spend money on this, then that's fine. If your assumption is, I want to get my 7, 8, 9, 10% annual return, plus I want everything in-house, plus, by the way, our assets under management are actually too little to justify all of this, then at the end of the year, you shouldn't be surprised that you're not reaching the financial targets, right? So I think it's a question of how cost sensitive you are, how much there is a need for tailorization and customization and a wish to invest into that. Look, I mean, we work sometimes with families where we have 2 parents and 3 kids in their teenager years, and they come to us at IMD where, technically they pay the same rates as a family that comes as a group of 40. Now, if they're willing to do that, which on a cost per person basis is, of course, a different equation, sure, then they're willing to make that investment. And it's a bit the same, in some way, for many of the families, in an abstracted sense, we take on that role. Some families have it in-house. Other families leverage their family officers. Other families rent out other type of services on the learning part. I think it's a function of multiple things. But again, I think what is really, really important is to start with what is the job to be done and what is the most effective and efficient way to do that.
Yeah, I want to pause and I want to make sure our audience gets an opportunity to ask questions. So if you could begin to put your questions in the chat, we're going to save maybe 15 minutes for the end of the conversation. But if you would begin putting those in the chat now, that would be helpful and we can get those questions to Peter. So, again, back to the ecosystem, I see a lot of family offices, again, whether it's single family office, multifamily office, embedded family office, they organize for one reason. And then as time goes on, they have to necessarily change. Oftentimes an office is created for a founder, and basically it's the office of the founder to take care of his or her stuff. And then years go by and the purpose for the office really changes. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of focusing on purpose, and then how frequently are you revisiting purpose so that you can check into the real functionality of that office?
Yeah, I think this is crucial. And I mean, in our Navigator framework, it all starts with a purpose. I mean, it starts with mapping out the ecosystem, but once we're clear on the ecosystem part around those 4 questions we elaborated on before, from there, you then define purpose. You define the purpose, the why of the family office. I mean, the Navigator is structured into the why, the what, the who, and the how ultimately. And it starts with the why, the purpose. What is the job to be done? Why do we need a family office, and what shall the family office do for the family? And I think that question is key. It's vital, and it needs to change over time. You need to revisit it every now and then, like any purpose of any organization as well, or your own life. I mean, it's what is my purpose in life? I think it does make sense from time to time to sit back and reflect a little bit on that question, and I think the same applies to a family office. Again, there are a few inflection points where we say, now you really need to rethink a little bit. Generational transitions, major shifts in the ecosystem. Like I said, we now no longer have our legacy business. Well, what is the purpose of the family office? Maybe it then becomes the office, the physical place, because suddenly we don't have a place to meet anymore, because our old office, the family business, the legacy, our heritage, where we would go in and we walk in and we meet people, we have our meeting room, we have our boardroom that we would leverage for our family meetings, is not ours anymore. So actually then the purpose of the family office is the office, right? A place to meet and actually convene as a family in the literal sense of an office. And we know of a family that's how it started. It was a different type of story. They didn't sell the business. It was taken away from them because of a political change in their environment, and they relocated into another country. They had liquidity there, and they literally needed a place to meet as a family. So their family office started as an office, and then from there it evolved into an investment group. But the purpose changed multiple times there, and it changes because the jobs to be done are changing, and I think every 3 to 5 years it does make sense, or 5 to 10 years, whatever time frame you want to pick and choose. It shouldn't be 50 years, but every now and then I think it does make sense to reflect back and not overthrow everything by default, but just sit back and reflect and say what works, what doesn't work. And we have a whole learning section actually in the book with questionnaires that then families can go into and say, well, what works, what doesn't work, and where do we need to rethink a little bit our way of doing it?
So that was going to be my next question. How do you really foster that, the mindset of becoming a learning family? Because oftentimes there's an entrepreneur, maybe it is first generation, and then there's this wealth that's created. But how do you become a learning family, and with a level of intentionality that can really make a difference for generations? I find, that's a tough one.
It's a tough one. I mean, it has to come from inside, right? It has to be an intrinsic motivation to do that, and to learn and to grow and to have a growth mindset and say, we can do better in whatever that means, right? Very often we oftentimes ask the questions to the families saying, what does good look like for you as a family? If you walk into your ecosystem in 25 years from now, what will this ecosystem look like? What do you want it to look like? Do you want it to be bigger? Do you want it to be more diversified? Do you want it to have more diversified species inside, right? Try to imagine the future of your ecosystem, and then think back, what are the jobs to be done to get there? And what are the checkpoints along the way where we need to pause and we reflect and we learn? But again, it has to come from the inside. And like with any organization, in the beginning, you're starting and you're growing, and obviously very often in the beginning, some of the most costly mistakes are made in a family office, because you just don't know yet. Like in an entrepreneurial venture, you set up, you don't know exactly how to do it. And by the way, in a family office, it's a critical one, because a family that is good at running an operating business isn't necessarily good at running a portfolio and acting as an investor. And oh, by the way, just because you have X million in a bank account now, it doesn't mean that you have a seat at the table at the most attractive investment deals. It's not like the big attractive direct deal companies were waiting for you to show up. They will say 50 million, that's nice. Get back in line, please, because there are 500 others that want to co-invest with us. And that is a harsh reality for families to walk into when they have a liquidity event and they sit on cash in an amount that they didn't necessarily think about beforehand, and then they get anxious and they think about, well, how do we deal with this? And oh, by the way, inflation is high. We need to get going. We need to deploy our capital. And those are some very costly mistakes that can happen in this first phase. And the learning mindset is such an important one where, again, you acknowledge that you don't know everything, and that's fine. But that you very consciously have checkpoints along the way, and you build them in the strategy, in the plan on creating a family office. You build in those checkpoints, and you question. You just question: are we doing it the right way? How can we be better at what we're trying to achieve? Or are we even clear on what we're trying to achieve? Again, what does good look like for us?
Yeah, I like the idea of you actually labeling it as a new venture, because that's exactly what it is. It is a new venture,
Yeah.
So you've successfully run a family business for a long time. You've had a liquidity event. You're in a completely new space.
Yeah.
Completely new space.
For many families, again, if there is such a mega shift, as in we have an operating company, we sell it, and we're transitioning now, and we're thinking about organizing ourselves in a different way, then this is the most obvious one, right? Then you would clearly say, well, yes, this can become our new family business, as a matter of fact. And some families end up saying our family office is our family business. And for many, that might be true. So yes, I mean, venture in an abstracted sense, again, sometimes it will be an entity in the legal terms. Sometimes it is a portfolio of services, but I think you should treat it from a strategy and business planning perspective like a venture, even if it is just an aggregation of services that you're renting. But I think you should apply the same diligence, saying there's a job to be done, there's a strategy, there's a business plan, we're executing, we have checkpoints, we have KPIs, and we're making sure that we have the right monitoring, oversight, and governance in place. So even if it is not an entity, you need to treat it like a venture.
So you've seen many of these family offices and interacted with many leaders that lead these family offices. I'm curious about one specific kind of ecosystem question,
Yeah.
and that is when you invite someone new into the family, when someone marries in, have you seen onboarding processes that have gone very well? Because I see this as one of the most challenging things in a family is the transition from outsider to insider. Someone that is joining the family, maybe from a similar socioeconomic background, but maybe not. And I'm really curious about family office and onboarding. How do we onboard new people? Any experiences with that, or families that come to mind that do it really well? Obviously not sharing who they are, but what does that look like?
Yeah. In some way, I think it does come back also in part to the question, who are we as a family? And, it's interesting. I mean, that, again, it's a trivial question. When you pose that question to a family of sufficient complexity, who is family? They're like, what do you mean? That's clear. Then you ask them, write down a number on a piece of paper. How many members are part of whatever you think your family is? I guarantee you the numbers will look different. And then you start arguments. And it's an interesting one, and now you're referencing to in-laws, right? Somebody else coming into the family, marrying into the family, or being a partner. Again, having governance in place, defining what is the role of an in-law. Is an in-law part of the family? Is an in-law allowed to work in our enterprise? Is an in-law allowed to have any insights into the informations and the financial data? Could an in-law even run our family office on our behalf because there's a great in-law and we have a more inclusive view? I mean, it's this view of how inclusive or exclusive are we in our way of thinking? And again, there are different philosophies, and some have a very strict point of view, and some have a very inclusive perspective. And again, that is also malleable, and some families go from one to the other, where they say maybe we started off with a very exclusive perspective on the role of non-bloodline family, and then over time they loosen up and they become a slightly more inclusive. It can also go the other way, right? Because of some bad experiences, and they say, we want to avoid this in the future. But there, I think the role of the family office or family officers is a quite critical one. I mean, I think a family office can play a critical role in onboarding new people. By the way, also in succession, intra-family succession or onboarding, right? About setting communication rules, fostering a good ecosystem of communication, development plans, setting occasions to celebrate, conflict resolution, acting if needed as a mediator in situations. So I think this is essential, right? So onboarding in-laws, but also onboarding the next generation. I think the family office can and should play a quite critical role, as in probably the family officers.
Yeah. Okay. We're getting a couple questions come in the chat, so I'm going to pivot to the audience here for a second. SG, if you would like to come on and ask your question, would like for you to do that. If you could unmute your phone, either that or I can just ask the question for you, but it's always fun to have a voice. So I'll just go ahead and ask SG's question. So the question is, are there some good examples of successful family offices from Africa? How many generations have they gone so far? So any experiences there in that region, Peter?
Yeah. Very interesting question, and I think it's a highly fascinating environment, and I think it's one where, especially in the family office space, we're going to see tremendous growth. In our family office program, we see a large and growing number of African families join that program. I think there is immense momentum. I think the question of, again, what is family is interpreted always differently depending on where you're from, right? The culture, background, and so I was once on a panel at a big family business conference in Africa, and we were talking about philanthropy, and I had phenomenal other speakers in that panel, big philanthropists and families. And they were talking, again, I'm not an expert on that cultural aspect, but they were sharing it, so I'm just resharing what they shared. And I think it made sense, which was essentially that the understanding of togetherness is a fundamentally different one than if we compare it to Europe or North America. I would assume obviously the same, which is more of an individualistic type of thinking, whereby there it's more of a community type of thinking, where you say, sure, we are family, we're bloodline related, but there are a whole bunch of people around us that are not bloodline related, but we treat them like family. We are a bigger community, and we function together. And I think that is an interesting one when you start thinking also a family office, because again, what is the job of the family office? And that is this fourth pillar of the questions we've discussed, which is our role in society and in the environment we operate in. And I think, again, the interpretation of a family office there, besides the asset management part, is also another one. Now, we had an interesting discussion. I was running a family office course on our Singapore campus just a few weeks ago, and there was a family from Nigeria, and the year before we, by chance, also had a family from Nigeria, and the topics were the same. But I think in today's environment, if you look at the countries around Nigeria, obviously there is slight unrest and instability, and there's a worry that what will happen to us. We've been first generation, second generation, very rapid growth of wealth, but we're in this kind of uber volatile environment. We need to protect our assets, so we need to diversify. We're too concentrated in a specific region, in a specific market, and for them, the job of the family office is help us protect our, in that case, financial wealth. As in, we need to diversify. We need a family office in Europe, in London, in Zurich, in Singapore, in New York, whatever, right? Just to help us de-risk, which is a very imminent thing. And it's the story I shared before of the family, where just because of some political change, overnight they were informed, by the way, what used to be yours is not yours anymore. It's now mine. by the way, you can also now leave the country, or you go to prison, right? So you want to anticipate those kind of situations. And I think the families from Nigeria, I assume it applies to a few other countries as well. I mean, I think it's always difficult to generalize for a continent that size, but I think there are obviously patterns, and I think there are certain instabilities that you just need to manage. And you need to think about the what if scenarios. And I think that's where a family office can help you. I mean, in some way, what Western families also did in the COVID time, you had no clue what was going on, right? You had no clue. So families suddenly ended up getting all kinds of passports, kind of just like, what if, maybe I have freedom to travel even though I'm locked up somewhere. So people started imagining a lot of what if scenarios and prepared for the what if scenarios. Now, in a European perspective, we look a little bit east, we see what's going on there, right? So when the Russia-Ukraine situation started to emerge, well, even in Switzerland, even in Germany, we had families suddenly saying, oh, we didn't have this for 70, 80 years now. This feels slightly uncomfortable. Maybe we should start thinking about real estate in name a country as far away as possible, right? Make it New Zealand, make it Chile, make it US, make it Canada, right? So again, and I think that is what we see a little bit in the African context as well. Let's just prepare and plan for the what if scenarios.
Thank you. Elaine, would you like to come on and add your voice to the call and ask your question? Elaine is the founder of a university, Musizi University in Uganda, Peter.
Great to meet you.
Thank you so much, actually, Peter, for that overview that you gave, and it almost answered the question that I was going to ask. As Dave has told you, part of our university plan is to set up a sustainable business institute, and one of the key areas of interest in that is a family business unit. So far, particularly in the case of Uganda, how family businesses survive and move on to the next generation is not something that there is some kind of method. I think every family has sort of, chanced their way around. Some have been very lucky, others haven't been very lucky. What advice would you give as somebody who's been practicing within the advisory and academic space for a budding industry, such as the one that is in Africa, and certainly such as the one that would be in Uganda?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think there are immense opportunities. And I mean, I see that not only on the African continent, I see that in Southeast Asia. I see that in many places where there is a huge demand. Again, family enterprises do still make up the majority of enterprises in the world. And we happen to see a lot of growth in the family office space. But when you think about family business, let's just say in the broader sense, I think there is so much work to be done in those environments. And, we're constantly discussing with local partners as well, how can we do more? How can we serve more families? How can we help more? At the end of the day, in the advisory space or in the education space, many of you, I guess, are ultimately the rate limiting factor is our time, and our time is not scalable, full stop. It's just the nature of this business, because especially in the family space, you work based on trust, and you work with families in a very intimate type of environment over years, and we all have a fixed amount of time in a given day and in a year, and but I think there is infinite opportunity, and I think it would be so valuable to have more localized initiatives and to do things right where you say, one of the challenges I also always see in general is, like, if you come into whatever environment, whether it's Africa or Southeast Asia or Latin America or whatever, we come in with sure, we're a global business school and we see cases from around the world. At the same time, we have a certain view of the world, like everybody does. And so I think having a more localized approach is super important. So I can only encourage you, maybe in the form of partnerships, with other institutions that have been doing this for a while, finding a good way to collaborate in this. But I think, I can only encourage you to build something. Then I see the biggest challenge is finding the people to do this, to do the jobs. I think this work is a relatively specific one. And even though many might say this is an attractive field and I want to be a family advisor or an educator, at the end of the day, there are not that many people that do this. That's a tricky one, right? To build out that franchise, who are the people to do this?
Well, it's such a multidisciplinary, activity. You have to understand the legal, the accounting, you have to understand the people side and the human dynamics. And so when you talk about, an ecosystem of, a small group, it is a relatively small group. And I think one of the challenges we have in academia is how do we train up that rising generation of people that can do that work? Because there are not enough of us, Peter. There are not enough of us. It's not even close.
I mean, one thing is, I think there are quite a few that do research on family businesses, but just because you do research on something doesn't mean that you're good at actually working in the advisory capacity or even in the classroom, as a matter of fact. And I think it's this balance between kind of academic thinking, at the same time having the practicability and ideally even the experience yourself from a business point of view, what it is to be an owner. What is it like to be an owner? And what are the type of decisions you need to struggle with? What are the reflections when you think at the end of the day and you need to think about your strategy? Do we go to the stock market or do we take our company off the stock market? Do we enter this joint venture? When we have a family office, do we invest in this private equity opportunity? Like, how do you do this actually, right? And I think having individuals, and by the way, how do we embed it in a legal framework? And how do we navigate the inheritance across 5 jurisdictions? This is non-trivial. And I don't know many advisors that really enter that space. You will have some that are in a niche and say, I help you on conflict resolution, or I help you on a family constitution. I can help you on this or that, right? But this ecosystem, total family wealth, holistic way of thinking, there are not so many.
So there's a couple of other questions in the chat, and I want to kind of generalize them with this question. And it's really about talent and attracting talent to serve in the family office. What are some of the important factors, and how have you seen families be able to attract someone? Because it's a unique person that can help a family navigate in this family office setting where many times they've moved from an operating company where they were very comfortable. Now they're looking for outside leadership. I imagine the talent in this space is scarce and maybe hard to locate. What advice or what guidance would you give to a family that was trying to identify this type of talent?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question, is access to talent, right? I mean, first of all, what kind of skills and capabilities are we looking for? If you think about families actually entering the space of a family office, who do you most instinctively turn to in the beginning, right? Let's say you have a liquidity event. We're thinking about a family office. Who are the usual suspects you have in mind, right? It's either the person in the bank that has been working with you and kind of did a pretty good job. So what about you coming in and managing things on our behalf, but in a closed office just for us, right? That's one usual suspect. The other one is the trusted advisor, confidant of the family. Now, obviously, you can immediately see that both of them have their strengths and both of them have their weaknesses, depending on what is the job to be done of the family office. Now, of course, you need to have the hard skills for whatever your job is that you're joining in, right? But I think especially here, you also need to have, high EQ. You need to be world-class in what you do. You need to be an alpha animal in your domain, but at the same time you need to be humble and with humility and respect to act as a steward on behalf of the family, right? And it needs to be trustworthy. Are the interests aligned? Are the incentive structures aligned? And that is not an easy one. And as a matter of fact, I mean, the whole compensation and incentive structure around family officers is a non-trivial one as well, where you see different philosophies. So I think the family office talent question is a really, really difficult one, especially if you start with a small one. I mean, again, if you have a family and you have somebody in the family who's kind of close to this domain and probably will just do many of the things on their own in some way, and you surround yourself with some add-on talents, I think that can work quite well. And then how do you make the transition into a fully professionalized ecosystem? And I think that is a more complex one where then also you need to think about, well, can we realistically have the best talents in-house, right? Also depending on where the family office is. Do they even want to go there? Do we create the right incentive structures? Are we willing to give them long-term incentive plans? Or would they be willing to just come on a base salary and a bonus, right? So I think that it's a very multifaceted question, and it's a non-trivial one. And many then come to realize, let's take the banker, and the banker did a good job, but the banker did a good job being embedded in a banking ecosystem. Yeah. Suddenly the banker sits isolated somewhere, potentially in the middle of nowhere, in an office, alone, by the way, maybe with one analyst, and you expect the same or even a better outcome. And that is statistically unlikely because you take them out of the ecosystem, which helped them perform. And so there are a lot of nuanced questions to think about.
Well, one more, and we're already out of time, but this one is so interesting. I mean, we talk about the challenge of family business succession leadership from a leadership perspective. We haven't even touched family office succession struggles. I mean, there is such a concentration risk that these families face when they put so much into a few people. And again, maybe that's a conversation for another day, but I really am concerned about that.
Yeah, I'll just share a short anecdote on that, and then we can conclude. But I 100% agree. And very often, and we see cases like that where maybe there was a strong patriarch or matriarch, very entrepreneurial, who would build up the family office and surround him or herself with people that would work with them as a CIO or CEO doing the job. And then the next generation comes up, and what is the contract going to be, right? How are they going to work with that person? Or do you do a simultaneous succession where you bring in a new family officer as well? We've seen families where I've been with one family very explicitly where I've seen the family officer in the context of succession on the family side, which he realized isn't going exactly smoothly. The family officer then came up with a great idea to say, well, this is my moment to dictate my terms. To say, well, you want me to do this on behalf of your children, then these are my terms. And suddenly the family is driven, and the family is handcuffed by the people around them. And what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah.
You haven't onboarded the people. You haven't built up the right oversight, the right education, the right understanding of investment stuff. You get 100-page financial reports that nobody understands in the family. And you have family officers that say, well, okay, these are my terms under which I will continue serving you. Take it or leave it. What are you going to do? So I think if there's one takeaway that I want to leave you with, and what we always tell families is, the family needs to be empowered. The family needs to be in the driver's seat, and not just one individual in the family, all of the family members. And that then also is the reason why we did create this book, The Family Office Navigator, in a simple way to empower families to understand what they actually need to understand, and not one individual, but the whole family, because it's a journey for everybody together, even the ones without a PhD in finance.
Yeah. Peter, I just want to thank you for doing the work that you've done to create this Family Office Navigator. I think putting it out in the world and allowing these families to interact with it, and allowing them to put systems in place that help to preserve their family relationships and perpetuate these amazing legacies that they've created. So I just want to thank you. Our time has flown. Appreciate you making time in your busy schedule. Just one last housekeeping item. Next month at Authors at Drucker, we'll hear from Rob Lockenauer about his book, The Family Business Handbook: How to Build and Sustain a Successful, Enduring Enterprise. Again, thank you all for investing your time, your most precious asset, with us. And until next time, take care. Thank you again, Peter.
Bye-bye.